The black bride was left at the altar, but the groom's brother Millionaire stayed to heal her heart. In a beautiful old church called St. Francis in Boston, everything was ready for a magical wedding. The hall was decorated with white flowers and satin ribbons, wrapping gently around the dark wooden pews. Isabel Bennet stood in the bride's room, looking at herself in the oval mirror. She was wearing her mother's wedding veil, carefully fixing it one last time. Her hands shook a little as she touched the tiny pearls stitched along the edges. I can't believe Ryan wanted the wedding here, Isabel thought. Through the window, she saw guests arriving in their fancy clothes. The church, with its tall towers and colorful stained glass windows, was where Ryan's parents had gotten married 30 years ago. Isabel's wedding dress fit her perfectly. It was a mermaid-style gown with French lace, hugging her just right. She had spent a year and a half planning every little detail. Isabel worked as a curator at Boston's Museum of Fine Arts, so she was used to getting everything just right. 15 minutes to go, said her best friend Amelia, peeking into the room. Is Ryan here yet? Amelia asked. Isabel's stomach started to feel funny. Ryan, her fiancé for 2 years, wasn't there yet. He hadn't even answered any of her messages since last night. He's probably just nervous, Amelia said, trying to sound calm, but Isabel could tell she was worried too. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. Isabel's bouquet of white peonies and champagne roses was on a table nearby, but some petals were starting to wilt. The priest had already sent 3 messages asking what was going on. Suddenly, Ryan's older brother, Maxwell Harrison, walked into the room. He looked serious, and Isabel felt her heart drop even before he said anything. Isabel, Maxwell said, his voice heavy with regret. Ryan's not coming. The words hit Isabel like a hammer. Amelia hugged her tightly as Maxwell handed her a white envelope. Isabel's hands trembled as she opened it. The note was short and painful. It read, I can't do this. I'm sorry. You deserve someone better. Isabel stood frozen, staring at the letter, while tears threatened to ruin her perfect makeup. Maxwell, always calm and reliable, looked both angry and sad. He was nothing like his younger brother. Maxwell was the CEO of a huge technology company and was known for always keeping his word. I'll take care of everything, Maxwell said firmly. Amelia, help Isabel get through this. I'll talk to the guests. Through the window, Isabel watched Maxwell in his sharp suit as he told the guests the wedding was off. Some people looked shocked, others upset, and many glanced toward the bride's room with pity. Isabel felt like she might throw up. Everything she had planned, the flowers, the dances, the decorations, was ruined. When Maxwell came back, Isabel was sitting quietly in a chair, her dress pooling around her like a big cloud. The guests are leaving, he told her. I've canceled the caterers and the reception. Thank you, Isabel whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm not leaving you alone, Maxwell said gently but firmly. Let me take you home. Isabel looked up and met Maxwell's steady gaze. His expression was kind but serious. She nodded, and he helped her to her feet. Together they left the church, Isabel holding on to what little dignity she had left. Maxwell's black car drove smoothly through the city as the sun began to set, turning the sky orange. Isabel stared out the window, seeing her reflection, a bride without a wedding. The sight felt like a scene from a sad movie. Do you want me to take you to your apartment? Maxwell asked. No, Isabel replied quickly. It's all decorated for after the honeymoon. I can't go there now. Her voice cracked. Maxwell nodded. You'll stay at my house on Beacon Hill, he said. There's a guest room. You can rest there. Isabel didn't have the energy to argue. Maxwell's presence, calm and steady, felt comforting after everything that had just happened. His house was even more stunning than she had imagined, a grand Victorian building with a beautiful garden and fancy iron gates. Inside it was elegant and full of contemporary art, which surprised Isabel since Maxwell always seemed so serious. Prepare the blue room for Miss Bennet, Maxwell told Hazel, his housekeeper, as they entered. Hazel, a kind older lady, quickly appeared. And get her something comfortable to wear. Isabel followed Hazel upstairs. The guest room was big and cozy, with soft blue and cream decorations. Exhausted, Isabel collapsed onto the floor, still wrapped in her wedding dress. She couldn't hold back her tears anymore. A soft knock on the door startled her. It was Maxwell, holding a glass of red wine. "I thought you might need this," he said gently, handing it to her. "There you go. This is exactly as you've written it." Isabel took it with shaking hands. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything. I know this is hard for you too." Maxwell sat in a chair nearby, loosening his tie. "Ryan has always been impulsive, but this—" He didn't finish the sentence, shaking his head instead. "Did you know?" Isabel whispered. "Did you know he'd do this?" "No," Maxwell said firmly. "If I had, I would have stopped him." Isabel sighed, bitterness creeping into her voice. "You're so different from him. You're constant. He's free." Maxwell looked at her thoughtfully. Sometimes freedom is just another word for running away. Hazel returned with some comfortable clothes and announced that the bath was ready. "Get some rest," Maxwell told Isabel. "Tomorrow we'll handle the practical stuff." After a long, hot shower, Isabel slipped into the oversized sweatshirt Hazel had given her. She sat on the bed, scrolling through her phone. Ryan's last message to her, sent 2 days ago, read, "Can't wait to start our life together." The words stung. Another knock at the door. Hazel entered with a tray. "Mr. Harrison wanted to make sure you ate something," she said kindly. The tray held warm tomato soup and fresh bread. "Is he always this thoughtful?" Isabel asked. Hazel smiled. "Mr. Harrison has a bigger heart than most people realize. He just doesn't show it." After Hazel left, Isabel ate the soup, surprised by how hungry she was. Her eyes wandered to a painting on the wall, its colors shimmering in blue and gold. "It's an original Rothko," Maxwell said from the doorway, startling her. Isabel looked up. "I didn't know you liked modern art." "There's a lot people don't know about me," Maxwell replied with a small smile. Isabel sighed. "Why did he do it, Maxwell? Why didn't he just talk to me?" Maxwell's face softened. "Ryan's always been scared to face his mistakes. He runs from them. Always has." Isabel looked at him closely. "What about you? Do you run away?" "No," Maxwell said, meeting her eyes. "I face things." For a moment they stared at each other, but the silence was broken by Maxwell's phone buzzing. "Is that him?" Isabel asked, her heart racing. "No," Maxwell replied. "It's work. Get some rest, Isabel. Tomorrow is a new day." And with that, he left her to sleep. Maxwell walked out of the room, leaving Isabel alone with her thoughts. She stayed on the large, soft bed, his last words echoing in her mind like whispers she couldn't quiet. Shadows danced on the ceiling, weaving patterns in the dim light. She stared at them, her heart heavy as she thought about how her life had completely changed in just a few hours. It was ironic, really. The man giving her a safe place now, Maxwell, was the brother of Ryan, the man who had left her behind. As the first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the silky blue curtains, they found Isabel still curled up on the bed. Her phone was clutched in her hand, the screen showing Ryan's last message. The few hours of restless sleep she had managed didn't help her aching heart. It still felt like a heavyweight pressing down on her chest. The soft sound of footsteps in the hallway made her sit up slightly. A gentle knock was followed by Hazel, the housekeeper, entering the room. She carried a breakfast tray, her kind face filled with concern. "Good morning, dear," Hazel said warmly as she placed the tray on a side table. "Mr. Harrison asked me to make sure you eat something. He had to leave early for a meeting, but he left this for you." She handed Isabel a plain white envelope. Isabel opened it to find a card inside, the neat, elegant handwriting immediately recognizable as Maxwell's. The note read, "I've canceled your museum appointments for today. Feel free to use the house and rest. I'll be back in the afternoon to help with anything you need." Isabel held the card in her hand, feeling a mix of gratitude and confusion. He's always been like that, Hazel said with a small smile as she adjusted the curtains. He takes care of everything, even the smallest details. Isabel nodded, her fingers wrapping around the warm cup of coffee. Hazel, she asked after a moment, have you worked for Maxwell for a long time? Oh, yes, Hazel replied, sitting in a chair near the bed. I've been with the family for 15 years. I saw both brothers grow up. Ryan, well, he was the favorite, charming, lively, and full of energy. Maxwell was the quiet one, the responsible one. They're so different, Isabel said, almost to herself. Like night and day, Hazel agreed with a chuckle. Ryan loved being the center of attention, but Maxwell? He preferred working behind the scenes. It was Maxwell who really built the family empire, you know. Isabel listened, thinking back to her interactions with Maxwell during her engagement to Ryan. He had always been there at family gatherings, but stayed in the background, quietly observing in his sharp suits with his serious eyes. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. Hazel pointed toward it. Miss Amelia has called several times, she said, concern in her voice. Isabel sighed and picked up the phone. The screen was filled with missed calls and unread messages. It seemed like the world outside was determined to intrude on her little bubble of quiet. After eating breakfast, Isabel decided to take a shower. The warm water felt comforting, washing away some of the heaviness in her chest. When she stepped out, she found a set of clothes Hazel had left for her. A simple blouse and pants. They fit perfectly, almost like they had been made for her. She spent the morning exploring the mansion, seeing it properly in daylight for the first time. It was a reflection of Maxwell, elegant, orderly, and full of little surprises. The walls were adorned with modern art pieces that contrasted beautifully with the house's traditional design. In the library, Isabel stopped to look at a photo on one of the shelves. It was a picture of Ryan and Maxwell as teenagers. Ryan was grinning broadly, his face full of energy and confidence. Maxwell, on the other hand, had a small, quiet smile. Even as a teenager, he seemed like someone who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. That was taken the summer Mr. Maxwell won his first chess competition. Hazel's voice broke the silence. Isabel turned to see her standing in the doorway. Mr. Ryan had just been made student council president. They looked happy, Isabel said softly, staring at the photo. They were, until their parents' accident, Hazel said, her voice tinged with sadness. After that, Maxwell took on everything, the family business and looking after Ryan too. Isabel sat down in a nearby chair, trying to process what she had just heard. Ryan rarely talked about his parents, and she realized how little she truly knew about that part of his life. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Moments later, Maxwell entered the library, still dressed in his business suit. He carried a folder of papers in one hand. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his deep voice steady and calm. "Better," Isabel replied honestly. "Thank you for taking care of the museum appointments." "It wasn't a problem," Maxwell said, taking a seat across from her. "I know the director there. I brought some documents we need to sort out." As Maxwell spread the papers on the coffee table, Isabel found herself watching him. His movements were precise and focused, so different from Ryan's restless energy. "The first thing is the apartment contract," Maxwell began. "Ryan's signed as your guarantor, but I can take over if you want to keep the place." "No," Isabel said quickly, shaking her head. "I can't stay there. There are too many memories." Maxwell nodded in understanding. "In that case, I can help with the move and the lease cancellation. As for the wedding suppliers—" "Maxwell," Isabel interrupted, her voice trembling slightly, "why are you doing all of this for me?" Maxwell paused, his hands still on the papers. He looked up at her, his eyes steady but softer than usual. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said after a moment, "and because no one deserves to go through something like this alone." Isabel felt a lump in her throat as she listened to him. For the first time, she saw Maxwell as more than the serious businessman. There was kindness and vulnerability beneath the surface. Her phone buzzed again, breaking the moment. It was Amelia calling. "I guess I need to face the world sooner or later," Isabel said with a sigh. "Yes," Maxwell said, standing up, "but you don't have to do it alone." Later that afternoon, Amelia arrived at the mansion. Isabel watched from the library window as her friend walked up the steps, her face unusually serious. When Amelia entered the room, she rushed forward to hug Isabel tightly. "Why didn't you let me come sooner?" Amelia asked, her voice filled with worry. Isabel hugged her back, feeling a little more grounded by her friend's presence. Maxwell, who had been working at a desk nearby, stood up quietly. "I'll leave you two alone," he said, walking toward the door. "Maxwell," Isabel called after him. "Thank you for everything." He nodded slightly before leaving the room. Once they were alone, Amelia sat down next to Isabel. "Isabel," she began, her voice hesitant, "you won't believe this. Ryan was seen boarding a flight to Las Vegas last night." Isabel froze. "Las Vegas? With who?" Amelia looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "Isla Peterson," she finally said. Isabel's stomach dropped. Isla Peterson, the young intern Ryan had hired months ago. He had often praised her fresh perspective and bright ideas. Isabel felt like the air had been knocked out of her. "You knew, didn't you?" Isabel asked, her voice shaking. "I had my suspicions," Amelia admitted, looking down at her hands. "But I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to upset you if it turned out to be nothing." Isabel stood up and walked to the window. She stared out at the perfectly trimmed garden, her thoughts a storm of emotions. "You know what's worse?" Isabel said quietly. "A part of me always knew something wasn't right, but I'd ignored it. I wanted to believe everything was fine." The sound of footsteps in the hallway caught their attention. Maxwell walked in, now dressed in more casual clothes. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "The lawyers sent over the apartment documents. I need your signature." Isabel nodded, grateful for the distraction. As Maxwell explained the paperwork, she couldn't help but notice how different he seemed in casual clothes, more relaxed, almost approachable. "Maxwell," Amelia asked suddenly, "did you know about Isla Peterson?" Maxwell's expression darkened slightly. "I found out this morning," he said. "She's no longer with the company." "You didn't have to do that," Isabel said softly. "Yes, I did," Maxwell replied firmly. "Harrison Enterprises has a strict policy on workplace relationships, and some things," he added, his voice quieter, "are just unacceptable." After Amelia left, Isabel stayed in the library with Maxwell. A peaceful silence filled the room as they finished the paperwork. "Maxwell," Isabel said after a while, "how do you handle everything?" "The business, Ryan?" "Life. You always seem so in control." Maxwell let out a soft laugh, surprising her. "I'm not always in control, Isabel," he admitted. "I've just learned how to seem like I am." Isabel watched him closely, noticing the faint lines of tiredness around his eyes. "Sometimes," he continued, "it's about doing what needs to be done, even if it's hard." For the first time in a long time, Isabel felt a sense of calm. Maxwell's steady presence was like an anchor in her stormy world. And as they sat together in the quiet library, she realized she wasn't as alone as she thought. Maxwell looked at Isabel with surprise. "It's so obvious," Isabel said with a small smile. Before they could talk more, Hazel walked out onto the balcony. She was carrying more coffee and some papers for Maxwell to sign. "The realtors sent some apartment options for Miss Bennett," Hazel said. "I left the photos in the library." "Thanks, Hazel," Isabel said as she got up. "I think it's time to start fresh." In the library, Isabel looked at the pictures of the apartments while Maxwell made some phone calls. Each photo felt like a new beginning, like turning a page in a book. "This one," Maxwell said, pointing at a picture after finishing his last call. "It's on Beacon Hill, just 3 blocks from here. It even has a perfect space for your home office." Isabel looked closely at the photo. The apartment was smaller than the one she used to share with Ryan, but it had charm. Big windows, wooden floors, and a little balcony with a view of the Charles River. "How did you know I wanted a home office?" she asked. "You mentioned it during a family dinner once," Maxwell said. "You said you dreamed of working on art restoration at home." Ryan laughed and said it wasn't practical. Isabel's chest felt warm. She was touched that Maxwell had remembered something she said so long ago. "Can we go see it this afternoon?" she asked. "I already made an appointment for 3 o'clock," Maxwell said with a smile. The rest of the morning flew by. Isabel answered some messages from friends and family, finally feeling brave enough to reply. Amelia, her friend, sent updates about the museum, where people were already gossiping about the canceled wedding. During lunch in the garden, Isabel watched Maxwell as he worked on his laptop. He was so focused. It was almost like watching an artist. "You know," Isabel said, breaking the peaceful silence, "I don't think I've ever really known you." Maxwell looked up. "What do you mean?" "I always thought of you as Ryan's serious older brother," Isabel explained. "You only came to family dinners because you had to, but now I see there's more to you." "Maybe," Maxwell said, closing his laptop. "I've never really let anyone know me." Before Isabel could reply, her phone buzzed. It was her mom calling for the third time that day. "I have to take this," she sighed. "I can't keep avoiding her." Maxwell nodded and stood up. "I'll be in the library when you're done. We have to leave in an hour to see the apartment." Isabel's talk with her mom was just as stressful as she expected. Lots of worry and frustration about Ryan. When she finally hung up, she felt drained. She went to the library and found Maxwell sorting papers. "Tough call?" he asked. "Mothers," Isabel said with a tired smile. "They know how to make us feel all our insecurities. Sometimes I wonder what my mom would have said if she were still here," Maxwell said softly. Isabel sat in a chair near him. "What do you think she would have said?" Maxwell thought for a moment. "That even the people who hurt us can teach us important lessons, and that building walls to protect yourself isn't always the best way." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Isabel felt like they shared a quiet understanding. Maxwell looked at his watch. "It's time. Ready to see your possible new home?" Isabel nodded, and they headed to the car. As they drove, she thought about how surprising life could be. Here she was, finding comfort and support from the person she used to think was cold and distant. The apartment was just like the photos, cozy but not too big. Isabel walked through the rooms, imagining her new life there. Maxwell talked with the realtor in the living room. "This room has such great natural light," Isabel said, standing by the window in what could become her studio. Golden sunlight poured in, making patterns on the wooden floor. "Can you see yourself working here?" Maxwell asked quietly. Isabel nodded. For the first time in days, she felt excited. "It's perfect for art restoration. I need natural light to see colors and textures clearly." "Miss Bennett," the realtor called from the living room, "other people are interested in this apartment. If you want it, we need to act today." Isabel looked at Maxwell. He gave her a small nod. "I'll take it," she said, surprising herself with how confident she sounded. While Maxwell handled the paperwork, Isabel explored the apartment more. She could almost see herself living here. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Amelia. "We need to talk. It's about Ryan." Isabel's stomach sank. She showed the message to Maxwell, who frowned. "Do you want to meet her now?" he asked. "I think I have to," Isabel said with a sigh. "The longer I wait, the harder it gets." 20 minutes later, they were in a small cafe. Amelia was already waiting, if for Beth looking unusually serious. Isabel braced herself. "First, I need you to know I just found out this morning," Amelia said. "I came straight to tell you." "Just say it," Isabel said, her voice shaky. "Ryan has been stealing money from the company," Amelia said quickly. "He used fake accounts and projects. The finance team found out this morning." Maxwell sat up straighter, his face hardening. How much? Almost $500,000, Amelia said, avoiding Isabel's eyes. And he used some of it to buy a house in Vegas, in Isla's name. Isabel felt like she'd been hit. Maxwell put a hand on her arm to steady her. That's why he needed to get married, Isabel whispered. If we signed a prenup, I'd be responsible for his crimes. Amelia nodded. If you'd married him, you would have been legally tied to it. Maxwell swore under his breath, gripping Isabel's arm a little tighter. I'll handle it, he said, his voice cold. How could I have been so blind? Isabel asked, more to herself than anyone else. You weren't blind, Maxwell said gently. Ryan knew exactly how to manipulate you. Amelia stood up. I need to get back to the office. The auditors will probably want to talk to you tomorrow, Maxwell. After Amelia left, Isabel and Maxwell sat quietly, each lost in thought. Finally, Isabel spoke. You know what's strange? Part of me feels relieved. At least now I know it wasn't my fault. Maxwell looked at her, his eyes full of concern. It was never your fault, Isabel. Ryan is the only one to blame. How do you keep forgiving him? Isabel asked suddenly. I've had a lot of practice, Maxwell said with a sad smile. But this time is different. This time he didn't just hurt himself, he hurt you. Something about the way Maxwell said those words made Isabel feel seen and safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Isabel looked up and saw Maxwell. His serious face made her stop breathing for a second. Maxwell, she started, but his phone rang. It's the lawyers, he said, looking at the screen. I need to answer this. Maxwell stepped outside to talk on the phone. Through the cafe window, Isabel watched him. It felt strange how much her feelings for him had changed in just a few days. When Maxwell came back, he looked more serious. We need to leave, he said. I have to take care of some things at the office. Of course, Isabel said as she stood up. I need to get back to the museum anyway. I can't hide forever. As they walked to the car, Maxwell stopped suddenly. Isabel, he said, turning to her, whatever happens with Ryan, you're not alone in this. Tears filled Isabel's eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. As they went back to their work, Isabel felt lighter. The painful truths of the day were like chains breaking, freeing her from a life full of lies. And through it all, Maxwell was there, a steady, quiet rock, someone she could count on. The news about Ryan stealing money from Harrison Enterprises spread fast. Isabel watched from her museum office as reporters crowded the entrance. They've been here since morning, said Amelia, walking in with 2 coffees. Maxwell gave a press conference. It was intense. Isabel quickly opened the video on her phone. Maxwell looked as perfect as ever, but his eyes were sharper, harder. Harrison Enterprises does not allow fraud or dishonesty, he said firmly. We are taking action and working with the authorities. He didn't say Ryan's name, Isabel noticed. He didn't need to, Amelia said. Everyone knows. The newspapers were calling Ryan the runaway groom. Isabel closed her eyes, feeling sick. How had her life become such a mess? Her almost marriage was now a public scandal. Her phone buzzed. A message from Maxwell. Can we talk? I'm on my way to the museum. Maxwell is coming here, Isabel told Amelia. I think he has more to tell me. Do you want me to stay? Amelia asked. No, Isabel said. I need to face this alone. 15 minutes later, Maxwell arrived. His perfect suit looked slightly messy. His tie was loose and there was a wrinkle in his jacket. How are you holding up? He asked kindly. Isabel pointed to the chair in front of her. I'm still trying to make sense of everything. Every new piece of news feels unreal. Maxwell sighed, running a hand through his hair. There's more, Isabel. We found something new this morning. Isabel's heart raced. What could be worse than the stolen money? Ryan has been planning this for a long time, Maxwell explained, speaking carefully. We found emails between him and Isla. They've known each other for over a year. Isabel froze. A year? But we were already engaged. Yes, Maxwell said softly. The wedding was part of their plan to get more of the company's money. Isabel stood and looked out the window. The reporters were still outside, like vultures waiting for scraps. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Because you deserve the truth," Maxwell said, stepping closer. "And because I don't want there to be secrets between us." "Between us?" Isabel repeated, surprised. Maxwell hesitated. "These past few days, seeing you handle everything so bravely, A knock on the door interrupted him. Amelia rushed in, looking worried. "Ryan's here," she said. "With Isla?" Isabel's legs felt weak, but Maxwell grabbed her arm to steady her. "He has no right to be here," Maxwell said angrily. "He's demanding to talk to both of you," Amelia explained. "He's threatening to make a scene if you don't." Isabel looked at Maxwell. She saw the same determination in his eyes that she felt growing inside herself. "Let's deal with this," she said firmly. The walk to the reception felt endless. Maxwell stayed by Isabel's side, a calm and steady presence. When they reached the lobby, Isabel saw Ryan for the first time since their wedding day. He looked thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. Ela stood next to him, her fancy dress looking out of place. "Isabel, Maxwell," Ryan said, stepping forward. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to say," Maxwell said coldly. "Talk to our lawyers." "Please," Ryan begged, looking back and forth between them. "We can fix this as a family." "Family," Isabel said, laughing bitterly. "You destroyed our family when you turned our marriage into a lie." "It wasn't like that," Ryan protested. "I was going to tell you." "When?" Maxwell interrupted. "After you dragged Isabel into your mess and ruined her reputation?" Isla stepped forward. "We didn't plan to hurt anyone," she said. Isabel's anger flared. "You planned everything, every lie, every trick." "Isabel, please," Ryan pleaded. "We can make this right. Maxwell, you've always helped me." "Not this time," Maxwell said firmly. "It's over, Ryan. The lawyers are filing charges. You should get a good lawyer too." Ryan stepped closer, looking angry, but Isabel stepped between him and Maxwell. "Get out," she said, her voice shaking but strong, "before I call security." For a moment, Ryan looked like he might argue, but something in Isabel's and Maxwell's eyes made him stop. He grabbed Isla's hand and left, mumbling, "I'm sorry." After they were gone, Isabel's legs gave out and she sank onto a bench. Maxwell sat beside her. "You were amazing," he said gently. Isabel looked at him and smiled. "We were amazing," she corrected. "Thank you for standing by me." "I always will," Maxwell said, taking her hand. A photographer's camera flashed through the glass door. Isabel didn't care anymore. For the first time, she realized that losing something she thought she wanted had helped her find what she really needed. The next morning, rain fell softly over Boston. Isabel sat in her new apartment, looking at the moving boxes scattered around. Her phone buzzed, a headline about the Harrison scandal. Reporters were now writing about Isabel and Maxwell, calling him her comfort. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Hazel, holding a breakfast basket. "Mr. Maxwell sent this," Hazel said kindly. "He's sorry he couldn't come himself. He had an early meeting." Isabel felt warm inside. Even in the chaos, Maxwell still thought of her. "Hazel," she asked, "how is Maxwell doing with all this?" Hazel hesitated. "In all the years I've worked for the Harrisons, I've never seen him so affected. It's not just the scandal, it's personal. Last night he spent hours looking at an old family photo. He said he felt like he failed to protect everyone." Isabel's heart ached. "He didn't fail," she said firmly. "He's the only one who hasn't let me down." Hazel gave her a knowing smile that made Isabel blush. Sometimes losing what we thought we wanted helps us find what we truly need. Before Isabel could reply, her phone rang. Amelia's voice sounded urgent. "Isabel, turn on the TV." Isabel switched on the TV and saw Ryan giving an interview with Ela beside him. He looked fake, acting like he was sorry. "The pressure of living in my brother's shadow made me do it," Ryan said. Isabel was furious. "He's trying to twist the story." Her phone rang again. It was Maxwell. "Are you seeing this?" she asked. Yes, he replied. I'm on my way. Don't say anything. Ryan's trying to distract everyone from the fraud. Suddenly, Isabel heard a loud noise over the phone. Twisting metal, shouts, and then silence. Maxwell? She called out, panicking. Maxwell? She tried calling him back, but the line was dead. Amelia arrived to find Isabel in tears, frantically trying to reach anyone who could tell her where Maxwell was. After what felt like forever, Hazel finally called Isabel. She said Maxwell had been in a car accident on his way to Isabel's apartment. He was at Massachusetts General Hospital. It's not serious, Hazel assured her, but he's asking to see you. Isabel rushed to the hospital and found Maxwell in a bed in the emergency room. He had some cuts on his face and a bandage on his arm. When he saw her, he tried to joke, "You should see the other car." But Isabel wasn't laughing. "It's not funny," she said, tears running down her cheeks. "But I didn't die," Maxwell said softly, cutting her off. "And maybe that's what I needed to realize a few things." "What things?" Isabel asked, her heart beating fast. "That life is too short to waste on regrets," Maxwell said. His eyes locked on hers, making everything else in the world fade away. "Sometimes you almost have to lose everything to see what really matters." Isabel held his unhurt hand tightly. She felt something strong and real between them. "Then," she said softly, "I saw Ryan's interview. What he said about us." Maxwell frowned. Ryan always saw what he wanted to see, but maybe this time he realized something before we did. The room went quiet. It was a silence full of unspoken feelings, feelings that had grown stronger during the chaos and tough days they'd shared. Isabel began to say something, but the doctor walked in. "Mr. Harrison," the doctor said, "we need to run some more tests." Isabel let go of Maxwell's hand and promised, "I'll be back soon." "I'll be waiting," Maxwell said with a small smile, his face still bruised. As Isabel walked down the hallway, she realized something. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns to lead us where we truly belong. The week after Maxwell's accident was a blur. Isabel spent her time visiting the hospital, dealing with reporters, and working at the museum. She tried to keep things normal, even though her life felt anything but normal. One afternoon, she went to the hospital with some papers Maxwell needed to sign. The sun shone through the windows, making golden patterns on the floor. Hazel met her in the hallway. "He's cranky today," Hazel warned. "The doctors want him to stay a few more days, and you know how he hates not being in charge." Isabel smiled, thinking about Maxwell's stubbornness. "I brought something that might cheer him up." She pulled a small painting out of her bag. When she entered Maxwell's room, he was sitting up in bed, his laptop open. His arm was still bandaged. "If you're here to tell me to rest," he teased, "I've heard it all before." Isabel smiled. "No lectures today. I brought this for you." She handed him the small painting. It was a tiny version of a Rothko, a type of art Maxwell loved. He looked at it and smiled, a real smile. "You remembered the one in the guest room," he said. "How could I forget?" Isabel replied. Their moment was interrupted when Isabel's phone rang. It was Amelia, her friend. Isabel put the phone on speaker. "Ryan gave another interview," Amelia said, sounding upset. "He's saying you and Maxwell were together before the wedding." Isabel felt her stomach drop. "That's not true," she exclaimed. "Ryan's trying to make it look like you two are the bad guys," Amelia continued. "The press loves the story of a love triangle. It's everywhere." Isabel hung up, feeling drained. Maxwell closed his laptop and looked at her. "Isabel," he said softly, "we need to talk about us." "Now?" she asked, surprised. "Yes, now, because Ryan might be lying about the past, but he's not totally wrong about the present." Isabel sat on the edge of his bed, her heart pounding. "Since that day at the church," Maxwell began, "when I saw you standing there, hurt but so strong, something changed for me. Or maybe it was always there, and I just didn't let myself feel it." "Maxwell," Isabel started, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish," he said gently. "Almost dying makes you see things clearly. And the truth is, these past few days, despite the chaos, have been the best days of my life." Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared this is just gratitude on my part, or that you're trying to fix things because of Ryan." Maxwell reached out and touched her cheek. "Do you really think that's all this is?" he asked softly. Before Isabel could answer, the doctor came back. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "your tests look good. If all goes well, you can go home in 2 days." "Finally, some good news," Maxwell said. "But," the doctor added, "you'll need someone to help you while your arm heals." "I can do that," Isabel offered, surprising even herself. Maxwell looked at her. "You don't have to." "I know," Isabel said, "but I want to. Maybe it's what we need. Time to figure out what's real." Maxwell stared at her, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "You know what's funny?" he said after a moment. "I've spent so much time fixing other people's mistakes that I almost missed the chance to do something right for myself." Isabel smiled and took his hand. "Then let's take our time and do this right," she said. "No rushing, no pressure, just us." The sun was setting outside, filling the room with warm golden light. It felt like a new beginning, and both of them knew it. 3 months later, autumn arrived in Boston. The leaves outside the Harrison mansion turned bright red and orange. A cool breeze swept through the garden. Isabel was in the library, organizing artwork that Maxwell was donating to the museum. Sunlight poured through the tall windows as she carefully sorted through the paintings. "I thought I'd find you here," Maxwell said from the doorway. Isabel turned and smiled, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. Maxwell had finally taken off his bandages, but his arm still showed some scars from a scary day he would never forget. "These paintings are so beautiful," Isabel said, pointing to the colorful pictures on the table. "Are you sure you want to give them all away?" Maxwell walked over to her and stopped beside her. He looked at one of the paintings she was working on. "Art should be shared, not kept hidden where no one can see it," he said. His words seemed to mean more than just the paintings, and Isabel noticed it. For weeks now, she had been helping him get better after his accident. During that time, they had grown closer, but they were also careful about what they said and how they acted. And there was always something unspoken between them. "I got a call from Amelia this morning," Maxwell said, changing the subject. "Ryan admitted he did all the bad things he was accused of. He made a deal with the police." Isabel nodded, feeling both happy and sad. "How long will he be in jail?" she asked. 3 years, Maxwell said, his voice serious. "But he might get out earlier, maybe in a year and a half. Isla also made a deal. She helped tell the truth about Ryan, so she won't go to jail as long." Isabel looked at Maxwell with kind eyes. "How are you feeling about all this?" she asked softly. She knew he always tried to carry big problems by himself. Maxwell finally turned to look at her. "I don't feel like it's my fault anymore," he said. "Maybe that means I've grown as a person." Isabel smiled, thinking about how much he had changed. When she first met Maxwell, he was all about business and didn't seem to care about anything else. But now she knew that wasn't true. "I heard from Hazel that you're looking for a new place to live," Isabel said, trying to sound casual. "Yes," Maxwell replied. "This house has too many memories. Some are happy, but some are not. I think it's time for a new start." Isabel nodded as she carefully packed one of the paintings into a box. "It's funny how life changes," she said. "Just a few months ago, I thought I was going to get married and have my perfect ending. But now? What about now?" Maxwell asked, his voice gentle. "Now I see that ending wouldn't have made me happy," Isabel admitted. "Sometimes we have to lose what we think we want to find what we really need." Maxwell took a step closer to her. Before he could say anything, Hazel, the housekeeper, came in with the mail. "Here's a letter for you, Isabel," Hazel said, handing her a heavy envelope. Isabel opened it quickly and read the letter. A big smile lit up her face. "I got a promotion." Isabel exclaimed. I'm going to be the director of restoration at the museum. That's amazing, Isabel, Maxwell said, truly happy for her. Isabel laughed a little. When Ryan left me at the altar, I thought my life was ruined, but now I see it was just the start of something better. Maxwell smiled at her and stepped closer again. Isabel, he began, his voice steady and warm, I think we've waited long enough. Waited for what? Isabel asked, her heart beating fast. For this, Maxwell said. He leaned in and kissed her softly. It was a gentle kiss, filled with all the feelings they hadn't said out loud. When they pulled apart, Isabel saw love in Maxwell's eyes, the kind she had always dreamed of but never really found before. You know, she said, smiling, for someone who likes to plan everything, this was very unexpected. Maxwell laughed, a real, happy laugh that Isabel loved hearing. Maybe you've taught me that not everything has to be planned, he said. From the doorway, Hazel chuckled. The truck for the paintings is here, she announced with a knowing smile. Thank you, Hazel, Maxwell said, though his eyes stayed on Isabel. His words carried more meaning than just thanking her for the announcement. Isabel and Maxwell stood together on the big porch, watching as the museum staff carefully loaded the paintings into the truck. The autumn sun made pretty shadows through the trees, and the cool breeze smelled like dried leaves and new beginnings. So, Isabel said, holding Maxwell's hand, what happens now? Now, Maxwell replied, squeezing her hand gently, we write our own story. No rules, no pressure, just us. I like that, Isabel said, smiling. Although I have to admit, this isn't the story I thought I'd be living a few months ago. The best stories are never the ones we plan, Maxwell said, pulling her closer. They're the ones that surprise us, make us grow, and show us who we really are. Isabel rested her head on Maxwell's shoulder as the last painting was loaded into the truck. Each painting told a part of the house's history, but now they also stood for new beginnings, a way of sharing beauty and finding meaning. You know, Isabel said softly, the first painting I saw in your house changed how I saw you. What do you mean? Maxwell asked, curious. It made me realize there was so much more to you than I thought, Isabel said. You're like a painting with layers and layers of color, full of surprises. Maxwell smiled and kissed her forehead. And you, he said, were the first person who cared enough to look past the surface. The last rays of sunshine lit up the porch as Isabel and Maxwell stood together. They had found love in a way neither of them expected, in a story they hadn't planned. Sometimes the best love isn't the one we imagine, but the one that finds us when we're least expecting it, with the most surprising person at the most surprising time. And on that beautiful autumn evening in Boston, Isabel and Maxwell realized that some endings are just the beginning of a much better story. Thank you for watching. If you like this story and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. That way you won't miss any new videos. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share what you think in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on our channel. We'll see you in the next story.